Hey everybody, it's Pastor Scott at Dallas Baptist Church. We're going to start back our Wednesday night services. I'm not sure how much longer I'll do these little devotional videos, but I do want to do this one for you today. We're going to start a study tonight on wilderness. In fact, let me get a hold of the DVD. It's called Walking with God in the Desert. It's by a guy named Ray Vanderlaan, and it's got a little book with it too. We're going to try to play off the video because this guy is a Bible teacher, and he has traveled to the Sinai Peninsula and various other places in Holy Land, and kind of gives you a contextual study, gives you a reference point, in other words. Shows you the actual wilderness, actual desert that the Israelites wandered in. And one of his overarching things is that you can experience God and his living waters in tough times. So let's look at a passage here in just a moment from Deuteronomy chapter 8. Okay, everybody, you should be watching my screen of my Bible app or my Bible program, Logos Bible Software. You'll notice on the right side, the left side, I should say, my other left, the ESV translation there. This is Deuteronomy chapter 8, and we're talking about wilderness. And this is Deuteronomy is the capstone of the Torah, the books of Moses, the Pentateuch. A lot of Deuteronomy is kind of the last commands of Moses, the last will and testament in some ways, God's last little push to the children of Israel as they try to go into the promised land. It's kind of a last hurrah, a summation in some ways of what's going on and what has happened. So chapter 8 starts, the whole commandment that I command you today, you shall be careful to do. One of the big emphases in Deuteronomy is this emphasis on now. Today, or one way to translate the Hebrew phrase is this day. This day, today, not tomorrow, not yesterday, but today. Do it. Be careful to do. Do what? The commandments. What God has told the people to do. His mitzvah is the Hebrew term there. Why? Well, this verse says that you may live and multiply and go into the land and possess the land. So live and multiply, go in and possess. That they should follow the commandments so they can live out the promise that God's given them. Because God swore to give it to their fathers. And God made promises to Abraham and Isaac. God made promises to Moses. God swore, and God keeps his promises. We as humans tend to break those promises, don't we? And the Israelites, several different times in the wilderness, broke promises to God, and they were disobedient. They made golden calves, they complained, they moaned, they groaned. And even the spies who went into the promised land, they misrepresented things to some degree and didn't have faith in God. So guess what? Only Joshua and Caleb were allowed to go into the promised land of the bunch that had left Egypt. A different generation went in the land. The verse 2 in the Hebrew starts out with the verb remember. You shall remember. Remember the whole way. Remembering is really important, and we talked about here recently in one of the devotionals about memorials. It talked about Memorial Day and remembering. It's important to remember the past, remember what we should do and what we can be. Remember the whole way. Remember the whole journey. Remember, this book is set at the end of the journey. They're at the precipice of the promised land. They've already gone through the wilderness. Remember the whole way. Now, some of these people didn't live the whole way that they're being spoken to. They're the second generation, maybe the third generation. But they're told to remember the traditions, the stories, what they've been told. Remember the whole way that the Lord, your God, has led you. That God has done it. God led them there. The meanderings, the wanderings, God did it for a reason. The 40 years in the wilderness, it wasn't by chance. God needed to mold and shape the people into what they needed to be. Well, how did he do that? Well, it says that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, to humble them. We all need to be humbled every now and then, to be brought down a peg or two, because we get a little too big for our britches, a little too prideful. And oftentimes when we do that, we think we know better than God, or we think we may know God so well that we can figure things out. And sometimes God says, no, you got your own self figured out, not me. But we need to be humbled every now and then. And that's what the wilderness experience was, the 40 years of wilderness was for Israelites, the Hebrews. There's a period to test them, to know what was in their heart, to really see what was there. Were they going to be obedient to God or not? Whether you would keep, and the verse continues, whether you would keep his commandments or not. Keep, to obey, to do. Verse 3 echoes a humbling thing here. And he humbled you and let you hunger and fed you with manna. They wandered around, didn't have any food for a while, didn't have water. God provided water. God provided manna and quail. God took care of them. Clothes didn't wear out for 40 years. Feet didn't swell for those 40 years. God took care of them. But look at verse 5. It says, know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you. And I've got that phrase, as a man disciplines his son, Lord your God disciplines you, highlighted. But I've noticed I've got disciplines is a different color there. And I've got the Hebrew word pulled up here, the Yod, Samach, Resh. And don't be too technical, but one of some of the semantic or the definitional range of that Hebrew word is to chastise, to discipline, to rebuke, and in some places, even in Deuteronomy, is to teach or to train. We get the Latin word, or the word discipline or disciple, from the Latin word discipula, and this cognates. It means to teach, to instruct. A discipula is a student. A disciple is a student. So God teaches, instructs us. Sometimes it's with a paddle, right? Sometimes it's with detention. Sometimes it's with care and tenderness. But God does it for our sake. God did this to the Israelites for their sake. And God did this, and in verse 16 mentions this again, that he might humble you and test you to do good in the end. That humbling aspect is very important in this text. We all go through wilderness experiences, don't we? This time of pandemic has been a humbling experience for me. Not having people in the church building during worship services, not being able to interact with people, to hug, to shake hands, I wasn't able to see my mama, and I'm a mama's boy. Got to talk to her, but I get to see her. It's humbling. Those times I've been out of work. Luckily, I'm not out of work now, but I've been out of work before. That's humbling. Some people are out of work now. Some people are humbled because they don't know how to provide food. I went to the board meeting for the Dallas High Shoals Christian Ministry recently, and if I remember the stats correctly, they averaged less than 100 people a week before the pandemic. And in the 2 days of operation they're currently doing now, they're averaging over 300 people a week receiving the service. And I can tell you the exact numbers, but I'll just give you a ballpark. There's a lot of people who are being humbled right now. Of course, there's a lot of people that are prideful too. But may God use this wilderness experience, the pandemic, may God use other wilderness experiences in our life, these dry, parched, heated times, to teach us reliance upon Him, to instruct us in His ways. But the one good thing we find about God's people is the hope over in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, or excuse me, 2 Corinthians chapter 4. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God. Look at that last little clause there. And not from us. For we are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. We go through wilderness times in our lives, in our spirituality, in our physical lives, psychological lives. We as Christians, we have a power inside of us that is from God, not from us. I'm sure if you think back about life, your life, and the many ups and downs, the valleys and hills, There have probably been points in your life where you're saying, if it had not been for God, I could have made it. It's all surpassing powers from God and not from us. Trust in Him and lean on Him in these dry and parched times. Some thoughts to ponder.